At present, our code's not really looking too good. But let me tell you why. First off, we have these two basically duplicated ternary expressions, right? So I think that we could probably do a better job of deciding what text and image name to display rather than putting two expressions in a row. The idea is that we're going to create a configuration object at the top of the file. So let's do it right now, and you'll see what I mean. So at the top of the file, I'm going to create a new object called hemisphere config. And this will be an object with two key value pairs inside of it. First will be a northern object, and the other one will be southern. And of course, it'll be an object as well. So now we have to make these keys inside of this object match up perfectly with the strings that we are returning from our hemisphere ternary operations. So we're going to change them as well. So I'm going to delete both of these hemisphere texts right here. So now these two objects are indeed going to tell us exactly what text and what image name we should use. If it's northern, we'll say text, it is northern hemisphere. And I'll designate the picture of northern hemisphere. And I say northern pick. So then what we can do is pretty much the same thing for the southern as well. I'll say text is, it is southern hemisphere. And I'll give it the picture of the southern pick. All right, so now that we've got this hemisphere config thing put together, we can now remove these ternary expressions. So to get at either of those objects, this thing right here, the text and the picture name, we can reference them back down inside of our component. Hemisphere config with square brackets. And inside of it, I'll put this hemisphere like so. So that's going to return object with the text and the picture name inside of this object. So then we can use a little bit of ES 2015 syntax to pull out that text and picture name and then very easily reference those properties inside of our return statement. So that means we are no longer going to have those duplicated ternary operations. So all the different options are very plainly separated right here. Didn't see that one coming, did you? So if a person ever needs to come back to this component and update the text or update the picture name, it's going to be really easy for them to do. Inside of my JSX, I'm going to fix here, remove that hemisphere thing and say text instead. And we are already referencing the picture right there, so there's no need to change it. Okay, so let's write in here the alt text. I will say hemisphere picture. All right, so without a doubt, this is a big improvement to the legibility of this component, yes? And now it looks pretty reasonable. Now, if we flip back over, we're going to see that our components are still working as expected. All right, so it seems like we don't have a problem, right? Not a care in the world. So now let's do some styling. So our app is a little bit different than we wanted it to be. So now we're going to use that, remember semantic UI? Those class names, and we'll also learn by adding custom styling to our app. So first up, we're going to create a CSS file to customize the background color, all right? So inside my SRC directory, I'm just going to create a new CSS file. I'm going to give it a name. Let's call it hemisphere.css and That's going to indicate to anyone else looking at my project that the CSS file is modifying the hemisphere display component. So let's first add a class name to our outside div right here. And I'm going to give it a class name of hemisphere inside of JavaScript object. As we know, this is referencing the result of this ternary operation right here, right? So that means it's going to return to us either northern or southern, depending on latitude. And I do that because I want to use different styling for both different situations. So right now I'm going to save this file and go over to Hemisphere CSS. And inside of here, I'll put on some styling for the northern and southern hemispheres. So I'm going to say northern. Inside of it, I'll say display flex, justify content center, align items center, height 100 VH, background color, let's give it some of a pinky-like color. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing for southern hemisphere. I'll copy and paste it. So now I just want to change that color. So this time I'll give it a pretty color. Full disclosure, I did arrange this color before the lesson, so you don't have to know the hex code. Okay, so now I'm going to save this. Now the last thing we'll do is make sure that this CSS file gets linked up to our project. To do that, I'll go back over to my hemisphere display component, and at the top of the file, I'll say import hemisphere.css, like so. So now we are going to import that CSS file into our project. Okay, so let's save it all. And then we should see our updated CSS file inside the browser. Perfect. So now let's change the latitude over here again to the northern hemisphere. I'm going to select Moscow and refresh the page. And it's working the way that we expect it to. So right now, there's still a little bit more styling left to do. Can we quickly do it? I think so. And I'm going to find my div right here. So inside this div, I will say another div with a class name of UI raised text container segment. Now I'm going to take this image and text inside of this div. And then after that, I'm going to wrap this image tag with a div that has the class name of image. And I'm also going to wrap this text with a div with the class name of UI teal bottom attached label. And then finally, I'm going to put this text inside a H1 tag to make it bigger. Okay, so I know we're going through the CSS a little quickly here, but just remember the entire goal of this course is really React and JavaScript, not CSS. And I'm also kind of assuming that you understand some of the basics of CSS. Now, if you're wondering about this class right here, you might have a look at the Semantic UI documentation. How's that for a tip? All right, so now let's save the file. Okay, it seems pretty good. So let's change the location to Northern Hemisphere and then refresh the page. Booyah! Awesome. So I think this is going to work really well. So let's take a little break here. When we come back, the next section, that's when we're going to make one or two last. Little changes that, well, I'm not going to say they're going to change your life, but they're going to make it a whole lot easier. See you then.